these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office. Experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
for insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all. In-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths.
We hold these truths.
With Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
We hold these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office. Experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
for insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all. In-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths.
We hold these truths.
With Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
Okay, so as we record this right now, Kabul has just fallen today, and the rest of Afghanistan has been falling really for months as the Taliban have moved through province after province and taken capital after capital. Kandahar was just a couple days ago, and now Kabul. The Afghan National Army, Afghan security forces don't appear to even be putting up a fight. And a lot of us predicted this. A lot of us said this was exactly what would happen if we did something like this being a very rapid withdrawal. And I have to say this. Look, this is what happens when simplistic slogans drive complex foreign policy. And if you're part of the No More Endless Wars crowd, that makes it feel good to yell that slogan. Well, you should just be cheering now. I mean, you should just be thanking Biden for doing exactly what you wanted. Because that's exactly what the No More Endless Wars crowd wanted. Bring the troops home, no more endless wars. Now, that seems to be about the extent of the foreign policy analysis, is just those slogans. And this is what happens when that's what we rely on. That's what happens when we let emotion take over foreign policy. And we should have learned this lesson. This exact same thing happened in 2011 when Barack Obama also wanted to listen to the emotional cries of bring the boys home. And then had to go right back because ISIS emerged soon after that. And now we find ourselves in a situation which is actually probably worse than pre 9/11. It's actually probably worse. We're going to get into that and assess what we're dealing with right now and maybe what we should do about it. I got my friend, Congressman Mike Waltz, here with me. Congressman from Florida. Mike, always great to be with you. Special Forces, also previous policy advisor in the White House under Presidents Obama and Bush, or just Obama?
President Bush. President Bush.
It's a lot of great experience that you've had. You even wrote a book about it. Serving on the front lines and then coming right back doing your kind of day job in the White House. So, pretty impressive background. Obviously, you've been on before. So, I mean, what do you think? React to what I just said. I mean, it's kind of, for guys like us, it's kind of at a loss for words here. Even though I always expected this to an extent because I knew both political parties were driving towards this, it still sucks.
Yeah, I'm vacillating honestly between rage and grief, wanting to go get my kid on and grab my rifle and go get on a plane and head over or crawl under the bed with a bottle of bourbon. But at the end of the day, you're absolutely right. You, me, a number of others told the last administration and this administration that this is what would happen if we just yanked everyone out like this. And you're absolutely right. It is easy to put a bumper sticker on, bring the boys home and bring the troops home. That's like saying I want to end world poverty, right?
Yeah.
Easy bumper sticker.
I'm against poverty and hunger.
Yes, right. And I'm against war too. Like those of us that like you that have literally left body parts on the battlefield, and those of us who've left so much blood, sweat, and tears and treasure there didn't want it to end either. And we are now going to see Al-Qaeda 3.0. That Biden's own intelligence community has repeatedly briefed us that they fully intend to reconstitute and attack the United States again. It's just beyond frustrating because, Dan, you and I know in the future, We're going to have to deal with it. The question is how long the Biden administration lets it fester. And once they hit us back here again, special operators are going to have to go back. But this time they're going to have no bases. Our local allies will have been hunted down, no host government to even work with. And we are in a worse place than pre 9/11 because we don't even have any allies in the North anymore from the Northern Alliance, which is who the horseback soldiers, the Green Berets that went in the very beginning dealt with. They're gone too. So
Right.
We've actually gone to a worse place than 9/11.
Let's go through some of the arguments we hear, and I really just I am focused on the no more
Right.
endless words crowd. I just can't. I'm just so done with that crowd that we're going to address everything they have to say, because it's been interesting for me to watch them sort of squint and do some mental gymnastics to try and come up with who do we blame, because it can't possibly be us, right? Because this isn't our fault. We didn't say hand it over to the Taliban. We just said bring the troops home, and like, well, they're one and the same, guys. That's what we've been trying to tell you if
Right.
you actually sought to understand the situation on the ground. And there's been a few interesting op-eds written recently about blaming the generals, holding the generals accountable. Now, some of this isn't a terrible argument. I think the generals misled politicians and the public to an extent, but in the end, I think I would sooner blame well, I don't know. There's a lot of factors for blame there, but it's an interesting take on it. We can discuss that. The other thing that this crowd kind of points out sort of aimlessly is, well, there was just no strategy. There was this was always going to happen, so we might as well rip the Band-Aid off and get it done with. And what I continue to point out is that what these people have, they have a complete inability to distinguish between nation building, which I do tend to agree with them on, nation, and especially in Afghanistan, in the rural areas of Afghanistan, nation building seems like a waste to a lot of people. I'm very sympathetic to that, but they can't seem to distinguish between that and a fairly small security contingent, let's say 10,000 troops, which is, by the way, a fraction of what we have in Korea, Japan, Germany. A fraction of that, and a small contingent that can conduct security operations and keep pressure on an enemy that does want to go to war with us. Even just because we decide there's no more war doesn't mean they do, right? That's how 9/11 happened. And what did we get for the last 20 years? Well, we got no more 9/11s. So I don't feel like my friends died in vain. I don't feel like I lost my eye in vain. I don't know how you feel about that, but those, what other arguments do they say? I mean, or respond to some of those.
Well, yeah, right. I mean, you pointed out that we shouldn't be doing nation building. We're not the world's police force. I want to build roads in Florida or Texas, not overseas. And they give the impression that we had hundreds of thousands of boots on the ground, kind of World War II style, over there. At the end of the Trump administration, we had 2,500, troops. They had two missions. One, counterterrorism, keep going after the leadership and put pressure on Al Qaeda and ISIS and Taliban senior leaders. And the reason we haven't had another 9/11 is because they've been running scared. When they're worried about where they're going to sleep at night, they can't plot and plan to attack the United States. It's about being on offense, not defense. And the other one, importantly, was providing that support to the Afghan army. The Afghan army is out doing the fighting and dying. What people need to understand is that, but what that small contingent of American troops were doing was providing the command and control, the logistics for the arms and equipment that we're providing, and importantly, critically, coordinating American air support when needed. And this full withdrawal not only yanked that out, it yanked out any intelligence that we had on the ground, the CIA, NSA, and others, and it yanked out American contractors that were helping maintain the Afghan Air Force. So yanking all of that out at once was devastating. But I think the other piece, Dan, that people need to understand, there's a lot of people asking, how did the Afghan army fail so fast and so quickly? You've had Biden, Anthony Blinken, Austin pointing the finger at them. And there's some blame there, absolutely. But they have to understand, and people need to understand the battlefield psychology. When America announces, the president of the United States announces that America is abandoning you, and the Taliban are saying, we're going to win eventually, one way or another, Afghan army commander, you have a choice of either being beheaded or we'll let you go home to your family. Which do you think they're going to choose? And if they choose to fight, the Taliban go after their family and start attacking their children, and attacking their village and their homes. So it's a much different dynamic. So for somebody like Secretary of State Blinken to sit in his air-conditioned office and say they should have fought harder under those kind of conditions, really to me just shows they're either clueless or heartless or both.
Probably a little bit of both, especially clueless. I mean, this is resignation worthy from the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State, and especially the way, as you pointed out, especially the way they're trying to blame everybody but themselves, right? It's the Trump administration's fault. It's the Afghan National Army's fault. They just gave up. Well, it's like you said. I mean, you're taking away their life raft as they're drowning, because they were just clinging to that. And look, this gets to a broader point of what we were doing there. We were there as an insurance policy.
And Dan, hey, very quickly though, I want to take on that. We inherited this plan myth that an excuse that they're throwing around. I had a real problem with that deal, and I said so publicly.
Yeah, we both signed a letter to the Trump administration.
We both did. You did as well. And so, let's look at the plans that the Biden administration from Trump has torn up in the first 6 months. Iran, Israel, aid to Palestine, Keystone Pipeline, Nord Stream 2. I mean, they've shown no problem with reversing course from the Trump administration, but yet we're expected to believe on this one, suddenly their hands were tied and they had no choices. It's just yet another excuse on the face of it, and it's ridiculous.
It's pretty ridiculous. I mean, I think the Trump deadline for troops out was in May. The Biden administration already changed it to September, and foolishly chose September 11th, by the way, which was just the deepest propaganda win for the enemy that you could imagine. I have, who the hell thought of that? Probably the same people that thought it was a good idea to have that weird TikTok star do that flamboyant, supposedly funny video in the White House the other day. Probably the same.
My theory, actually, Dan, is it was Susan Rice who thought it would be great to make a trade for Bergdahl and then celebrate him as a hero in the Rose Garden. I think she's still lurking around the White House making terrible decisions.
It's such a twisted view. And look, it's guys like Biden, and it's guys like everybody in the Biden administration has been in sort of the foreign policy blob for a long time. And the reason that Americans are so misinformed about what's going on in Afghanistan is because their leaders misinformed them. And you were never supposed to present this as a war in a traditional sense. This was always a security presence that prevents another safe haven that causes 9/11. And I'm sorry that people get impatient with that presence, but you deal with it, because the alternative is a terrorist safe haven and 9/11. That is the alternative.
That's right. I know it's more 9/11s.
It's unbelievable to me that people don't get that.
Yeah, I know. First of all, there's no timeline on protecting the United States, right? Secondly, we're fighting an ideology, an idea. And it took decades to defeat the idea of communism. It took decades to defeat fascism. It's going to take that long to defeat Islamic extremism. But I want to fight it forward. We need to be fighting it in places like Kandahar, not Kansas City, when it follows us home. Right. So, you're absolutely right. But that's, the endless war crowd can never articulate a counterterrorism strategy beyond bring the troops home, too hard, too long, too expensive.
No, they run right past that point of American security. They run right past it. Like they just talk past you on that point because their position is just emotional. It's completely filled with emotion. It's also worth noting, over the last few years, I think we did come to a good balance. I think Trump's end goal was pull the troops out the exact same way Biden's doing it now. But to his credit, he never actually did it. Okay, so I don't want to hear everybody blaming him for this because he ain't president. But that what happened over the last few years was a small contingency of about, ranging between 3,000 and 10,000 troops, with a pretty limited mission set. We haven't had a combat casualty in Afghanistan for 18 months. Like, let
Right.
that sink in. Does that sound like an endless war? Like, an active duty service member is at much more risk from dying on base right now in the United States than than getting killed in Afghanistan. That's just a fact. So it's not exactly like we were just fighting this endless war. We had a security presence the way that we have in hundreds of countries. I mean, what special operations are in well over 100 countries. And what are we doing? We're creating a security network where we build alliances, we conduct training with them, and we have eyes and ears on the ground. Right?
Right.
It would be insane to think that the Department of Defense is supposed to just like man the beaches on the Atlantic and the Pacific, right? Like, we got the SEALs in San Diego and Virginia. We're just sitting there on the beach, just defending America. No, you have to. We're a globalized society, whether you like it
This
or
is
not.
about
And you have to
American
be,
leadership. That's
and,
absolutely right, Dan. And I
and you also have to
remind
be
people
forward
that
deployed.
that's right. Fight forward. I want to be on offense, not defense. We've had special forces in Colombia for 40 years. And in the 80s, a narco state with airliners being blown up that was threatened, with narco groups and an insurgency threatening to take over the government. And look at where we are now. But it was training, logistics, at times limited air support. We have done this before, and to your point, we're doing it all over the world. So why this obsession when we have half the world's terrorist organizations that our intel community says today still want to hit the West? And you would have thought, I want to make this point too, that the crowd making this decision would have learned from the pullout of Iraq that led to Al Qaeda 2.0, which evolved into ISIS, the size of Indiana, a caliphate that was launching attacks all over the world. The same people are in charge, Dan. Secretary Austin was in charge of Central Command, in charge of the Middle East. Blinken was the Deputy National Security Advisor. The current head of DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, was the Deputy of CIA. It's all the same folks making the exact same mistakes, and we're going to lead to the exact same disastrous results, except this time we don't have any bases in the region like we did around Iraq. We don't have the Kurds because everybody who worked with us in Afghanistan will have been hunted down and assassinated. And by the way, the Taliban now have a whole army's worth, huge caches worth of armor, artillery, heavy weapons, ammunition, and on down the list that future American soldiers are going to have to deal with in order to get through them to Al Qaeda once they start plotting and planning to attack America again. And that blood is going to be on all of their hands, and we're going to hold them accountable.
I think we should. Like I said, I think they should just resign at this point. It's worth noting, too, this was so preventable. Look, I've got a timeline here, which is kind of interesting because this started a few months ago. On April 14th, when Biden announced the troop withdrawal from Afghanistan starting on May 1st and to end on September 11th. Again, huge propaganda win to the enemy. But you got these kind of people making decisions. Very quickly after that, major offensives began throughout Afghanistan from the Taliban. Another reason it was so completely insane to announce withdrawal on this timeline is because it's right at the start of fighting season. The fighting season in Afghanistan, as the snow melts and everything, it starts in the spring. It gets really hot and heavy during the summer, and then it dies down again for the winter. That's how it is every single year. And to announce withdrawals in this fashion with a weak Afghan government in place, and what could be weak for a very long time, was so disappointing and irresponsible, and again so avoidable. You look at this timeline, and these provinces are just falling one by one, and yet we're pretending like nothing's going on. I mean, they just had no plan. They had no plan to get ourselves out. They certainly didn't have a plan for the interpreters.
That's right.
That's something me and you were pretty adamant about, getting our interpreters out and our contractors out. But little did we realize they had no plan to get ourselves out. I mean, Bagram fell a while ago to Taliban insurgents. They didn't even hand it over to the Afghan army. It's just so disgraceful, and I'm at a loss for words because I'm just trying to think, like, what on earth were these people thinking? what on earth were they thinking? And by the way, like again, they can try to blame Trump's negotiation all day long, but the Trump administration had not really adhered to that negotiation because the Taliban broke it right away. Again, I don't think Trump had the right ideas on this. However, at least he respected red lines. When the Taliban broke those
Well,
red
that's right.
lines, the administration pushed back.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I know because I talked to President Trump directly about my concerns that, Ambassador Khalilzad, who was kind of the point man for all of these negotiations, had convinced everyone that the Taliban had changed. They were interested in peace. They really wanted to govern. They would do power sharing. I expressed my concern that this was a bad deal, that these guys were using it to get us out, to buy time, to build up their forces, to launch the offensive, the very offensive that we saw. But I also promise you that President Trump listened, and he did want to get folks out. He was frustrated with hard, long, and expensive. But when they came to him, as they did right before the end of the administration, and said, we can't go completely to zero, he listened, and we had 2,500 at the end, along with the CIA and along with our contractors providing critical support to the Afghan Air Force. I also promise you that he would have had a plan for our interpreters, would have had a plan for ongoing intelligence, would have had a plan to protect those who had fought and stood with us, journalists, female politicians, even folks in civil society, anybody who had taken a stand against extremism. And finally, he would have had a plan, which we don't still to this day, to have bases somewhere in the region if we have to go back in. And I think when people look on the map and see that Afghanistan's surrounded by, by places that aren't going to let us have a base, and the fact that we gave up, part of Biden's big reasoning for doing this was that we got to shift to China. You and I both agree with that. But we also had a base in Afghanistan that was sandwiched between China, Russia, and Iran. And we just gave it up for nothing. We got nothing in response.
And again, the arguments for this stuff are so interesting. Yeah, we need to shift to China, but they're not mutually exclusive. Again, we had such a small footprint, a small counterterror footprint in Afghanistan, as we do in many places around the world. They're just not on the news a lot, so Americans don't get all emotional about it. But it's a necessary part of your foreign policy. And I'm sorry that it is, right? Like that can frustrate people that it is. But look, we don't live in the world that you wish we lived in. We live in the real one. And in the real one, there's a lot of people out there that want to kill us. And, at maximum, they're at a 12-hour flight from the United States. So get used to this problem. My God. And we can't keep making these mistakes over and over again. What do you think about some of the op-eds I've seen recently that are really taking swipes at the American generals, the American military specifically, for their handling of it? And I think some of that stems from, and rightfully so, from a lot of the whitewashing that occurred, giving this rosy picture of the situation in Afghanistan year after year, without being a little bit more honest, and maybe taking a step back and saying, let's have a totally different strategy here. And how about we communicate it to people so that the No More Endless War crowd doesn't get as strong as it did?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a lot of what I wrote my book about. It was an exercise in frustration, because I was in the White House, hearing what the president intended us to do. I was in the Pentagon, but then I was out on the ground seeing us do the exact opposite. So where's that disconnect between a president of the United States saying we're going in this direction, and then the generals taking us in a different one? Man, that's a long conversation. I think part of it has been risk aversion over the years. With the draft army, you were pulled out of your life and given every incentive to do everything necessary, take every risk you needed to win, and then so that you could come back home. Now a tour over in somewhere like Afghanistan or Iraq is a 1-year blip on an otherwise very promising career. So the incentive becomes, don't screw it up. Don't have don't lose a sensitive item. Don't have a base overrun. But the other piece is that we didn't deal with some of the basic fundamentals, like the sanctuary the Taliban have enjoyed in Pakistan. No insurgency that I know of in history has ever been defeated when it enjoys a sanctuary next door, state support to help it rest, refit, rearm, and keep going. We never dealt with that piece. And then finally, I think in many ways, we tried to create a government and a military that looked exactly like ours. Rather than working with some of these local groups that do have the fight in them. And still, they're reaching out to me to this day. I just spoke to the son of Ahmed Shah Massoud, the famous resistance fighter that the Taliban was never able to conquer, but al-Qaeda killed right on the eve of 9/11, that he's going to continue the fight, but we have to support him. So there's a lot of reasons, I think, for why we are where we are. We've made a lot of mistakes, but back to our original point, just because it's been hard or just because we made mistakes, it doesn't mean we just surrender and throw our hands up and let more 9/11s, let it fester and the cancer spread and let more 9/11s happen again. We adjust,
Right.
And we move forward.
Well, it's like in economics, the sunk cost fallacy, where let's say, you put $100,000 into your house and you thought it'd be done, but you still need another 10,000. What you don't do is just walk away from your house because they're like, oh God, that $100,000 is really eating me up, and I'm so mad I wasted it. But if you just, you don't do is just walk away, right? A rational decision is made upon the current event and what might become later. And so, like what you hear from the critics is this hand wringing, this constant hand wringing about what we've spent and the mistakes we've made, and using that as a justification to just throw it all away. And it's just so mind blowing to me, and I don't know how to explain it except that it's based on pure emotion. And from our side, I really don't get it, because you would think that we wanted them that we're drafting people and forcing these guys to go to war. You would think that based on the emotional reaction to the endless wars, right? Like it's something I've never understood. And what really irks me is when they start to justify their position by invoking veteran sacrifices like mine and like my dead friends. Like that really pisses me off. And it just we're not your victims. We don't need your saviorship. All we want is to protect this country. And we want you to stop using silly slogans to drive our foreign policy. That you want to know what veterans want? That's what we want. And
you're absolutely right. And I do want to. I think it's worth stating again. You mentioned it, that their sacrifice, yours, mine, my Green Berets I didn't bring home, to our Gold Star families that are out there that are so upset right now, to the victims of 9/11, the sacrifices were not in vain. We volunteered to go fight this forward so that we don't have suicide bombers in our schools or more planes flying into more towers. That al-Qaeda was not going to stop with 9/11. They fully intended to continue to hit us again. So we knew exactly what we were doing. I'm proud of that service, and I'm proud that we've gone 20 years without another 9/11. We had some inspired attacks because of the mistake of pulling out of Iraq too soon that led to ISIS. Mm-hmm. But I just want to be loud and clear to everyone. You should hold your heads high. It was not in vain. And what has me so mad now, though, is that we are going to have to start all over again. And there is going to be far more blood and treasure spent than those that were hand-wringing about what we had, what we've spent so far. I mean, Dan, imagine if we had said, 20 years was it in Korea. So we pulled out in 1975. And anybody who's worked with the South Korean army knows that we are still doing a lot of support, even to this day, with the world's 12th largest economy. But back then, they had a higher illiteracy rate than the Afghan army does today. That country was devastated by Japanese occupation. It took years of working with them. So for Biden in his most recent statement to say, we don't get involved in civil strife, well, how about North and South Korea? How about Colombia and the FARC? How about the Philippines and their Islamist insurgency? And we can, I guess he wouldn't have agreed with getting in between East and West Germany either. It's just an asinine foreign policy and approach. And now they're trying to justify this this failure that I think is going to turn out to be one of the worst foreign policy disasters in modern American history.
No, the people, yeah. I mean, the Bidens of the world, this administration, and the bipartisan effort or the bipartisan
And the Rand
agreement.
Pauls, the Rand
Yeah.
Pauls of the world too, Dan. I mean, this
Exactly.
I don't want
That's
anybody
what I mean.
thinking, well, why aren't you calling out Republicans? It's isolationism based in ignorance. And frankly, if you look at, Biden has been a politician his entire life. He's never really dealt with the mentality that you find over there. Tony Blinken has been a staffer for Biden his entire life. So you have a lot of people that I don't think understand that the Taliban could care less if you isolate them from European international cocktail parties, right? They understand strength and leverage, and when it comes to it, bombs on foreheads. And that's when you negotiate with them, when you're in a position of strength.
You're absolutely right. Look, I mean, I'm hardest on those on the right, Because I think they should know better. And I don't understand our side on this. I mean, like I said, they've gotten very emotional about it over the years. Like they act as if I want to make them go and fight a war they don't want to fight. And they deliberately talk past the basic points of like, well, do you disagree with us going in there at all? Answer that question. And once we're in there, because everybody was for that at the time, everybody, for good reason, and for very good reason. It was not an irrational decision. You can quibble about Iraq, I can totally get that one, but Afghanistan, it was a highly rational foreign policy decision to go in there and prevent that safe haven. And once you're there, okay, you can't just take that back. And these guys who make these arguments, like you said, Rand Paul, plenty on our side. It's a hell of a lot more than him. Like they act as if you can just wave a magic wand in some utopianistic fashion and change the past in order to inform your future. That's just not true. They're living in a reality that does not exist, and I'm so damn sick of it. And this is what you get. I mean, you and I, we've been banging our heads against the wall on this particular point for a long time. We've written about it a lot, and a part of me always knew that it would end up like this because of this bipartisan desire for it to end up like this. Now, of course, they deny that now. They're like, well, not like this. Well, hey, those of us who know what we're talking about told you it would end up like this, and you should have listened. And don't try to blame somebody else right now. I mean, that's ridiculous. I mean, again, like the things I see tweeted are just so utterly ridiculous. No, a lot of people on our side wanted Biden to do this, and so you better be defending him. That's all I got to say about that.
So, and I think so here we are. The flag is down over our embassy. This is a Saigon moment, even though Blinken wants to deny it, and Biden is back in his basement, and we haven't heard anything from him personally. But here we are with the flag is down, the Afghan flag is down, and replacing that is the flag of the Taliban and soon to be Al Qaeda 3.0. So where do we go from here? And the administration needs to decide: are they just going to shrug their shoulders and let this thing continue to fester, or are they going to support a continued resistance through unconventional warfare, through local militias, and do to the Taliban what they did to us, and not let Al Qaeda become completely resurgent and dominant like ISIS did in Iraq? And that's the next decision before us. I think part of it too is we have to deal with Pakistan, and I think we have to deal with them much more harshly because at best they turned a blind eye. At worst, they've actively aided and abetted in this.
Yeah, I know a lot of people in our business think they certainly did actively aid and abet much of it. The ISI, that's what they're called, right? Their intelligence service.
Yeah, that's right. The ISI
is I can't remember what it stands for, but in any case, it's often complicit. I mean, it's a strange relationship you have with them. You don't want to completely isolate them and then just let China fill the vacuum. And what's frustrating about this entire thing too is China will clearly fill the vacuum in Afghanistan. They don't have these moral qualms with just being an ally of the Taliban, and they will be happy to expropriate those resources. Afghanistan is extremely rich in mineral resources, so. It's hard to see any silver lining here, except it made some people feel good because they had bumper stickers that said we should bring the troops home. Like that's literally it. There's no other benefits here, and all policy decisions have to be viewed through a lens of what the costs and benefits are. And God, this administration is just screwed up in so many ways that it's unbelievable. I mean, they listen to the bumper sticker sloganeers on foreign policy. They listen to radical immigration activists on the southern border. They listen to socialists on the economy. I mean, it's so
Well,
much
Dan,
worse
and you
than I
know,
thought it
Dan,
was going to
the
be.
thing that's so the thing that's so frustrating to me is Biden portrays himself as, you know, the consoler in chief and this kind of kind, you know, grandpa. But if you look at the actions, it's heartless. If you look at as you mentioned, the migrants on the southern border, 30 to 40%, according to Doctors Without Borders, of the young girls and women are being sold into sex slavery. If you look at did nothing for the people of Cuba as they took their lives in their hands to stand for freedom, is doing nothing for Afghan women, nothing for our interpreters that stood with us, nothing for the millions of Uyghurs that are in modern day slavery and forced labor, and we can keep going around the world. So his inaction, again, heartless, clueless, or both. I don't know. It's unbelievable.
And of course, they're sending back in about 3,000 troops. I mean, so we're like immediately
5,000.
5,000. So how they get back in and exactly where they stay, I don't know. I'm curious to see how this ground truth actually plays out. And are they going to leave soon? Are we going to have this same dumb discussion over and over and over again? I mean, it's a different situation on the ground now. I mean, the government has completely fallen. The president is out of the country. And
you have a mullah that is likely to become, Mullah Baradar is his name, that's likely to become the next ruler. So basically, we're going to have, in Iran, they call them ayatollahs, in as you know, in Sunni Islam, mullahs, but another Islamic emirate. We're going to have a bastion of terrorism. China gets $1 trillion of critical minerals. And by the way, the country most upset, the world's largest democracy and a critical ally, India, is becoming surrounded on all sides. So
yeah, and if you care about China, because no more endless wars crowd seems to only care about China. Fine, I think I think that should be our priority. To be fair,
agreed.
But then maybe you might want an air base that's only a few hundred miles from the Chinese border. Maybe that would be a good thing to hold on to. You care about Iran, I'm assuming, so maybe you want strongholds in places right next to Iran, and you can squeeze them from both sides if necessary. So there's just a complete lack of strategic thinking here. And again, if I'm going to blame Republican politicians, now labeled the neocons, I'm pretty sure I'm labeled a neocon. I'm pretty sure you're labeled a neocon because we have nuance. I think that's just code for having.
We believe in American leadership forward, outside our borders,
and having a nuanced discussion about American foreign policy that isn't reduced to bumper sticker slogans. But fine, if that's what makes you a neocon. Now, but I do agree with that crowd on look, you can't make democracy happen everywhere. And we agree on that point, but there's a lot of middle ground. But
again, Dan, just real quick on that. I mean, South Korea was a dictatorship until the 80s, right? So yeah, this isn't about creating Switzerlands all over the world. This is about engaging where we have a national interest. And I don't know, if you look at Afghanistan, like you said, you're on top of half the world's terrorist organizations, and with bases that border China, southern flank of Russia, eastern flank of Iran. So 4 out of the 5 major threats in our national security strategy are touched by Afghanistan. And yet we just walked away. I mean, just gave it away for nothing.
It's a sad day for guys like us. 20 years of hitting it hard, and then to end it like this is completely inevitable, or completely avoidable, a completely avoidable mistake. I think we've ranted on long enough about it. What do you think? Anything else to add?
Yeah, no, I think it's important, though. It probably sounded like we were ranting. I know we're both frustrated as hell, but it's important to shoot down some of these myths. Some of these bumper stickers, as you said, from the isolationists, these excuses that the Biden administration's throwing out. They had no choice. So suddenly they're totally beholden to what Trump wanted to do. That's a newsflash. That it was all the Afghans' fault. Well, they were given, beheading or go home because America's abandoned you. And the great power competition argument as well. I think it's important that we continue to talk about these things because, as you said, our generals and a lot of our elected leaders are not talking about it and not talking about why it matters to the everyday American who's trying to, get their kids to school, deal with mask mandates, and get their next paycheck. But this will follow us home, and the next Pulse nightclub, the next 9/11, we can go down the list of attacks. Is going to have real consequences.
And that was
we're
the point.
heading into the 20th anniversary now, 20th anniversary of 9/11, with with this kind of with flags flying over Kabul, representing Al Qaeda and the Taliban.
Yeah, and that was the point I was making about the, again, the so-called neocons. Like, if there's one thing to truly blame them for, yeah, maybe a little bit too idealistic about what kind of democracies can be created abroad, but also just a complete lack of communication with the American people. I mean, we kind of and that lack of communication radicalized a lot of people. It made them extremely emotional about these foreign policy decisions, or this presence that we have in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. And you try to explain, everything we've been explaining over the last hour on this podcast. You try to explain that to them, and all they hear is you just want a nation build. You just want to spend $1 trillion on them and creating and it's like, no, that's actually not it. We're trying to explain to you the security reasons and the national security interests that we have here, and they just can't hear it. Like, I notice it over and over again. People just can't hear that, and it's gotten us into this situation. And I just hope we learn those lessons. I mean, that's why you and I keep talking about this, because we can't change it at this point. But I hope that maybe this time America will finally learn its lesson. It didn't happen after Vietnam. It didn't after ISIS, the resurgence of ISIS, and maybe it'll happen after this one.
It's like an insurance policy. You invest a little bit, it prevents the catastrophic, blow up and accident down the line. So I'm with you, brother.
Thanks for coming on, Mike. Always good to have you.
Okay. Talk soon, Dan. Go Army.
Yeah. Okay. I'll give you that one since you're a guest. All right. Mike Waltz, everybody. Appreciate it. Bye.
Right. Thanks, Dan. Bye-bye.